So just go through. So just first and foremost, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the various lands on which we're all meeting today. So here in Brisbane, where I am, that's the Turrbal and Yuggera people. And on behalf of everyone here in this meeting, I'd like to extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging, while also acknowledging any other First Nations people that might be here with us today. So as a lot of us will know, this week is Homelessness Week. And so this is an annual week hosted by Homelessness Australia, which aims to raise awareness around the impacts of homelessness with a solution-based focus on ending homelessness. So the date's on Monday, the 7th of August through until this coming Sunday, the 13th of August. And the theme this year is It's Time to End Homelessness. And so I guess we thought it was really relevant to pop this slide in here and just touch base on that because we all do really valuable work across the sector. We'll play a critical part in this work. So you can find more information there. There's a quick download guide to their information action pack and also a link through to their website there too. So our session overview today, we'll just start with an acknowledgement of our peak partners, followed by some program updates for our Community Housing Futures program. We'll then touch base with our just on the newly released issue paper relating to the National Housing and Homelessness Plan from the Commonwealth Government, followed by the Queensland Government Shaping Southeast Queensland Draft Regional Plan. And as mentioned earlier, we'll also have Rachel, our public policy research working here with us, who'll be providing some insight into housing densities, which she'll be talking on today. And so as normal, there'll be some questions, time for questions towards the end too. So just to start off, I'd like to acknowledge our peak partners, some of which may have joined us here already. I can see Anne-Marie and Fiona online at the moment. And so we've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Queensland, which is near Whitman, the Queensland Housing Industry Association Queensland, so known as CHIA, Anne-Marie, and Q Shelter is the auspice body fix program consisting of Fiona Cornelia. We also have Alana Kanafa, who's the program manager today, and so Alana, feel free to jump in at any time. So the first round for our grants is closed. We'll just sort of dive straight into this. And so those grants are for the Business Advisory Services Program and also the Growth Readiness and Capability Assessments. Alana, did you want to touch base or make any comments on where that's at the moment?
Yeah, of course. So thanks, Murray, and thanks for joining us, everyone. So the first rounds of grants closed last week, and we were really, really pleased with the response. We've had some responses from a diverse group of CHPs and across lots of different regions, which is great to see and was what was our hope. So they're now undergoing a pre-screen just to check basic eligibility, and then they'll be assessed by the evaluation panel. So I don't have any concrete timeframes at this stage, but it's certainly one of our priorities to make sure that the money can flow quite quickly. So we'll be jumping on that as soon as we possibly can, and we'll be keeping the applicants notified as well as the professional panel along the way.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So just in terms, oh, sorry, were you going to say something else, Alana?
I just had David in the chat said that you were dropping in and out a bit.
Oh, okay.
Sure, just maybe keep it right in front. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Let me know to Alana, jump in if my audio goes a little bit too. So the training tools resources part of the program, there's some money there to go towards the development of these resources. And so we just thought we'd leave this slide here as a little bit of a prompt, and there's a link there just in terms of if anybody has any ideas or anything, the industry reference group in the program is workshopping at the moment. And there's been some ideas that we've come up with for this at the moment. So for example, due diligence on a development, including information around a toolkit for understanding building contracts and potentially facilitating a tender, an LGA land deal toolkit, regional growth forum toolkit. Alana, sort of talk to that
Yeah, you might want to unplug your headphones. I'm thinking, Murray, the
Ah,
microphone keeps cutting in and out. Just try that. But I'll just kind of echo what you said, that currently with the with working with the industry reference group for this program and with our peaks, we're workshopping some of the ideas that have come through quite strongly. We've been doing some environmental scanning of the current tools and resources that are existing out there, and there's some really clear areas that are missing. So we're able to work on that. So at this stage, it's we're kind of looking at the few strong options, and then we'll go from there. But like Murray was saying, if there's ever any suggestion or a gap that you see, please let us know and contact us via email, which is great. And some of you already have, which is really helpful. So
thanks, Lana. I'm just taking my headphones out. Can you hear me okay now?
yeah, I can hear you better now.
Awesome. Good. Sorry about that, everybody.
It wouldn't be one of our sessions without a technical issue, Murray. So I'm glad we could tick that off early.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for your summary and providing that information. So our industry reference group, which I don't know if you all heard, but I did reference to that just before you gave that info, Alana. And so the industry reference group, so far we've had 3 of those virtually, which has been really valuable in helping to inform the program's delivery and rollout. So if you're a community housing provider, I'd love to hear from you. The sort of time investment's not too expensive, so it's bi-monthly for 1 hour at this stage. And so just click through myself, Alana, an email or touch base with us so we can fill you in a little bit more. But so far, I think, Alana, did you want to touch base on that at all? I think it's been really valuable for us so far, and I know that it's really helped navigate a few of the kind of key things we're working with.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered it well. Just that, the time commitment is minimal. It's only, we meet bi-monthly, and then if required. And it's just a good opportunity. At the moment, we've got a good range of CHPs in there. So if you'd like to join and help influence the program, we'd love to have you. So not too late. I will just say, which I didn't talk about. Sorry, Murray, to take away. But with the closing of the first round of grants, we are in the process of talking about a second round of grants, and we're really interested in incorporating learnings that we've found from across round 1. But I think the true learnings will come out when we start evaluating some of those, or when the applications are evaluated. So we are looking at a round 2 for those professional advisory grants, and we're going to make sure that we just really assess some of the learnings along the way and incorporate them to potentially broaden the scope, or go down a more specific avenue. But that will be to be confirmed as we discuss that more with the peaks and the governance group.
So our next slide here is just relating to the Commonwealth Government consultation, which is going to guide the National Housing and Homelessness Plan. To share some brief information about this process, I thought I'd take some words from Minister Julie Collins. And so this plan set out of a 10-year national vision across the responsibilities of different levels of government to help guide future housing and homelessness policy. It will consider the full spectrum of housing and homelessness challenges, from homelessness to home ownership. It will acknowledge relevant state and territory strategies and programs, and identify gaps and set out policy objectives for the future. And so I know that Fiona and Jackson and the broader Q Shelter team as a collective are currently reviewing this document and other relatable information alongside this process, and that there's consultation within the sector, and we'll capture that information accordingly. And also, sorry, Anne-Marie, to throw you in the spotlight too a little bit, but I'm sure you'd be more than happy to talk to anybody around that as well. And so did anybody have any kind of comments or thoughts on that initially, or Fiona or Anne-Marie?
I haven't read it yet. I suspect I'm not the only one that hasn't had time to read it, but I have spoken to a few colleagues interstate who are pretty underwhelmed by the paper. So if anyone on the call has read it, happy to hear some initial feedback. But yeah, I mean, that's a joint peak consultation. Fiona sent some information out about that coming up on the 30th of August, is it? So yeah, be good if people have an opportunity to make sure they've read it by then and participate in that, because I think for it to be a valuable process, we all have to get behind the wheel.
And can I just say to that, Anne-Marie, that I have just read it this morning, partly because I had a radio interview about it, so I needed to read it. But,
yeah,
you know, I agree. I think it states, for people working all the time in the sector, it states a lot of obvious things about the nature of homelessness in Australia. I think the light on the hill really is that it does highlight prevention as a really important, you know, element in the system, so that's useful. And the other thing I'd say is that it talks about the entire housing spectrum, which I think is healthy as well. That and I guess I'm also pleased that it is a housing and homelessness action plan. Like the artificial demarcation between those two things, I think ongoing is not helpful, even though we might play different roles in the sector. I think a paper like this really just establishes the context. It asks a myriad of questions. I think we need to see, you know, many submissions which are really, really focused on a blueprint for success and for, you know, preventing the challenge, but also addressing the current nature of the challenge. It doesn't shy away from what the data is saying about demand. So I thought all of that was really quite positive, but it's not a highly technical paper, and it doesn't have a lot of depth about solutions at all. It just really states the issue and asks a lot of questions.
Does it ask the right questions, Fiona?
Oh, look, there's a lot of them. I think that's the bit I found hardest to follow. Just like, how would you write a submission answering all of those questions? I think a more streamlined approach to submission writing, where it's really calling out the key actions and strategies that are required, setting targets and other policy settings as well. What I think, and I haven't had a chance to talk to my colleagues in the other peaks, but I think it'd probably be good for peaks to pull together an early rather than later submission to sort of float with as many stakeholders as possible, so that we can make sure that there's also some information out there in our own submissions that might help other submissions. But I think, you know, the opportunity to talk about prevention and what that really does mean and what investment in that looks like, I think is an opportunity not to be missed. But also I'm encouraged about the whole housing spectrum being represented, if only lightly, but it's still there. It's not just a discussion about social housing at this stage. It's my 5-minute expert pitch about what's in that paper. I only read it this morning and I'm still coming to grips with it myself too.
I was wondering if you had a few notes there, Fiona. That was fantastic, thank you. And so just sort of moving on from that brings us to our next, which is our Queensland government is now undertaking a targeted review of the existing regional plan to respond to current housing pressures in the context of significant growth and events in our region, that our region's experienced since 2017. And so community consultation commenced for this draft regional plan a week ago, and it still remains open for another, I think, 5 weeks. So it's closing on the 20th of September. And I guess to further expand on this a little bit, it's been identified already. We know that the expected growth of this region will grow considerably to 2.2 million by 2046. And so that will require, around another 900,000 new dwellings. So with a lot of growth expected, it's really imperative that this revised plan has attention from everybody. I guess same thing to Fiona and Anne-Marie. Did you sort of open that up to yourselves and also anybody else here today? Is there any sort of comments just more specifically around the SEQ paper?
I went to a briefing about it on last Friday. So I've got a lot of notes, but a couple of big takeaways, I think, for people on the call and for community housing providers across Queensland is that they've got a target in relation to 20% of social and affordable housing to be included in future housing developments, which is ambitious and exciting to see. I have to say, it was a higher target than I'd anticipated. But there's a catch, and one is that they haven't actually decided what the ratio of social to affordable housing might be within that 20%. And so they're very keen to get submissions, and I would be encouraging as many people as possible, and particularly social housing providers in Queensland, to be writing a submission, even if it's short, around what you think the reasonable ratio should be of social to affordable. And in fact, it might well be that Chair Queensland hosts another conversation just to have a discussion with members about that in terms of where we should land. But they're also interested to know whether the 20% is the right target. And I'm confident that they will get a lot of submissions telling them it's too high. So the more responses we have confirming that that's the level of investment and supply that we need going forward, I think the better. So I would encourage people, it's quite a long document, but obviously in the consultation you can just choose to respond to the things that are most relevant to your organisation and to our sector.
Can I just also say, Anne-Marie, I agree that it's going to really need a lot of submissions to kind of paint the picture from the perspective of the supply of social and affordable housing. I think the other thing to be really trying to understand in some future briefings is what are the models for delivering that affordable housing, because some of the comments that the Deputy Premier made seem to indicate that, you know, in the mix was homes that are affordable to buy, and I guess also whether or not significant involvement by the private sector in basically build to rent type models will not necessarily see that product held in perpetuity. So I think this is just one way to really put the case for how CHPs can achieve really long-term recycled government investment in terms of you know, current delivery, but also future growth, and therefore the sustainability of the organisation. So I think they're things to be unpacked, but I would be hoping that we can really facilitate and encourage as much interest as possible from the CHP sector into doing submissions. Not on our own, of course. This is all with Anne-Marie and Neil, and, you know, really important role for industry peaks.
Now, I'd just like to introduce Rachel. So if I guess those last growth stats in mind, Rachel's been with Shelter for a few weeks now, and she's already making a huge impact alongside Jackson and the team. And so Rachel is a researcher and public professional. We're using that as part of this presentation to talk about the importance of housing diversity. It's timely that we continue to emphasise the necessity of housing growth, and we already know that we have to come up with new ideas to increase density in our suburbs, especially while keeping the things, I guess, and lifestyle that people see value in. So I guess with that in mind, I'll hand over to you, Rachel.
Hi everyone. I'll just note that I am having technical difficulties, so I've joined on my camera on one computer and my sound's on another computer. So
that's okay.
You'll have to kind of scroll along and you'll be able to see my face.
No worries at all.
But thanks for having me. And just to, I guess, recap on what Anne-Marie said, this is particularly important, this discussion about housing diversity with that new South East Queensland Regional Plan. So, you know, for those that aren't across the planning space, obviously the regional plans are set by the state and they cover an entire region. South East Queensland's obviously Brisbane, Gold Coast, up to the Gold Coast, up to the Sunshine Coast, and then all the way out to Toowoomba. So they're very large areas. There's also regional plans in North Queensland, which is kind of centred around Townsville, but also Burdekin, Charters Towers, Hinchinbrook, Palm Island, and Wide Bay Burnett, which is, you know, Bundaberg, Cherbourg, Fraser Coast, Gympie, North and South Burnett. So what happens in the southeast for the revision of their planning scheme or their planning instrument will have, I would say, ramifications for those other regions as well, and then how we do regional planning. So that the housing diversity target, which is increasing the diversity in between detached houses and high-rise apartments. So your kind of walk-up apartments in your townhouses, that's been included in the South East Queensland Regional Plan for the first time. So that's really interesting too, as well as that social and affordable housing target. So it'll be an interesting space to watch. But in terms of how that relates to my research, go to that second slide, Murray. So part of the research I've done at UQ is looking at housing diversity and housing density and how that's implemented in our planning schemes or in our planning frameworks. So that slide's just about why housing diversity and density is important. Partly it's because we can't keep chewing up farmland and vegetation on the outskirts of our towns and cities for new housing. It's a finite resource. Eventually it will be all gone. Those outer suburban developments are also very expensive to service for the utilities, roads, schools that need to be built from the ground up. And it's largely an expense that it's borne by the state and by councils. That has impacts on people's lifestyles. You know, it's long commutes, rising house prices. Rising house prices for existing suburbs means that people can't often live in the suburbs they grew up in. Whereas housing diversity provides kind of different price points in the same neighbourhood. So for those that can't afford or don't want a detached house in a particular area, they can make some compromises on space and decide to live in a unit or a townhouse. So those pictures are just some examples. There's an example there in Freshwater in Cairns, and then there's some in Brisbane in Moorooka and Yeronga. And they're relatively quite expensive areas to live in those cities, but the housing diversity means that there are a wider range of people that can afford to live there because there's different price points. When you've only got houses and they all cost the same amount, then you get a kind of homogenous community. So this is obviously particularly important as we age and want to downsize, as we all know that, you know, people are getting older. So just in that next slide, Murray, in terms of my research, we looked at how do local governments seek to implement these strategies. And so usually it's through local government zoning decisions. So zoning emerged out of the industrial city. It was a way of separating polluting industry from where people lived. And then I'd say we got a bit too carried away after World War II, and we started to separate things that probably didn't need to be separated. So then we have, you know, whole areas of our city dedicated to one thing. We've got whole areas that are just pretty much residential, and then whole areas of workplaces, and big roads separating them. So the first image there is a zoning proposal of Brisbane in 1952, and you can see the colour coding of all the different uses. So the pinks is industry actually, and the reds and the light pink are different housing. And there's actually a green belt. So there was a belt of parks and farmland that was supposed to restrict outward sprawl of Brisbane back in the 1950s. So parts of the green belt include, you know, Carindale and suburbs that are obviously quite built up now. And then that second picture is the densification that happened in Newstead and Tenerife in that early 1990s, late 1980s. So it was kind of the first local government-led redevelopment in Brisbane. So in terms of my research, we looked at these areas and how they changed over time. And obviously this is quite important. Something that we've learned out of COVID is when you dedicate things to a single use, when you have areas that are just commercial, like our CBDs, and everyone starts working from home, it can have a pretty significant impact on, you know, our cafes and anything that relies on commuting workers. So just go that final slide, Murray. So in terms of the areas that I looked at in this study, it was 6 study areas, all targeted for high density development and mixed uses. So some were inner city suburbs like Newstead, Tenerife, and others were kind of sprawling, low density cul-de-sacs in Upper Mount Gravatt and everything in between. So basically we found that it's not as simple as changing the zone and assuming that development will follow. There's a lot of different other factors that influence whether a site will be kind of viable for redevelopment. So we actually found quite interestingly that it was the suburbs with really disconnected street network. So suburbs with big highways through them, whether it was Woolloongabba or Upper Mount Gravatt, and that's that picture there of Woolloongabba from 1946 to 1987, where the Southeast Freeway kind of slices in between that suburb, and Upper Mount Gravatt with the same highway but further south. We found that they were actually experiencing the lowest rates of densification compared to more connected suburbs like Indooroopilly in Brisbane's west, and South Brisbane on the south, you know, directly across the Brisbane River from the city. So we found that a lot of buildings were demolished in this time, generally houses, and what replaced them were kind of bigger and bulkier buildings with more site coverage, which is obviously substantially less space for trees and green space. but also had some kind of interesting findings about character houses. So in Brisbane, a character house is anything built before 1946. So from about the 1990s, you couldn't demolish them anymore, but you can substantially kind of modify them and renovate them. So in that picture there is kind of what you're allowed to do. You can add these, you know, large garages, and you can extend the house, but you can't convert them to apartments. So that, from a planning speak, that's called exclusionary zoning. So it's kind of the opposite of inclusionary zoning, because it excludes certain dwelling types. So it's not really an aesthetic decision. Well, it's more of a, you could have apartments that look like houses, but that's not allowed. It's an exclusion of a particular dwelling type. And there's a kind of question about whether that belongs in our cities, or whether that's a legacy that we, from the kind of post-World War II period, that we need to do away with. That's kind of some of the conversations that are coming out of that South East Queensland Regional Plan Review. So that's kind of a very brief and quick summary of the things that I was working on before I came to Q Shelter, and started working, you know, really looking forward to working in the policy space at Q Shelter. And there's just the last slides got some summaries of that research, you know, some publications, which are hopefully relatively easy to read. But if anyone's got any questions, yes, let me know, or shoot me an email, or that's about it.
Awesome, and thank you so much for doing this, Rachel. And I had to give you a LinkedIn plug, so I hope you don't mind me adding this slide in. But so if anybody here is on LinkedIn, I recommend jumping on Rachel's newsletter, but she sort of has been cracking along with it. So some of the recent ones, there's one called A Garage as Big as the House, which I guess references what you were just saying, Rachel, around those changes. And there's another one which I was quite interested in called An Ode to the Six Pack. And then there's the Brisbane Planning, you know, parts 1 through to 5. So all really informative and interesting information. And I'm keen to keep reading as they come out, Rachel.
Thanks. I have to say, I think six packs really divide people in Queensland, whether you love them or you hate them. I'm a person, I love the six pack. I think they're kind of a quintessential Australian form of higher density development, which you don't see very often anywhere else in the world. But yeah, not everyone agrees.
I'm glad. I was going to say, could you just give a quick summary around that? Because I wonder if people are going to read that and go, oh, are you talking about like a six pack of beer, or like, what do you mean there? So that's
yeah, I mean, if you go back to that original slides, the six pack are just those kind of brick box apartments that you'll see across most of our cities and towns in Queensland. So they were built prior to probably the 1960s, 1970s, but we used to have a bit more of a flexible zoning system. So back in the past, there were regulations about how tall your building had to be and how far back from the street it had to be. But you could pretty much, if you were within that frame, you could build an apartment or you could build a house. So we end up with these six pack apartments, which, you know, arguably have the size and bulk sometimes of a contemporary house, but they provide, you know, 6 to 8, sometimes 12 dwellings on one standard size lot. So they're a legacy of a time where we had more flexible zoning. So many of these suburbs that have these six packs now, you wouldn't actually be able to build them anymore in that same location because of the new zoning requirements that we have.
Did anybody have any questions specifically for Rachel and what she's just presented? I think there might be some digesting time, even a little summary for me. I've got a few notes, but I guess I'd like to Rachel, you being in the office, I can pick your brain anytime. In terms of the broader presentation, and I guess also to open up to everybody that's here, even just in terms of challenges, learnings, importance of information, questions about this presentation. Did anybody want to kick off with any points of discussion? there is sort of one thing which I can just bring forward, I guess, and something that I'm a little bit more interested to know about too, from the shelter's perspective, is just in terms of head leasing, and I guess to introduce this conversation, just around if there's, what are we currently experiencing with our head leasing at the moment, and potential issues, that the sector's facing. Fiona, even if you wanted to maybe jump into that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, opened up now for people to raise any matters, discuss anything that they want to. But we agreed a couple of months back that we'd also just make sure people felt they could raise any issues specific to head leasing programs, how things are progressing with your contracts, if there are any emerging issues that need the advocacy of the peaks. People would remember that Anne-Marie led a letter from the peaks a couple of months ago to just sort of raise issues with the contracts. So yeah, we're very keen to touch base on that, but opening it up to anything that people want to ask or say.
I've got a couple of news items, if I may. Well, they're not really news, but things that I really want to flag with people. One is that we had the registrar, the relatively new 6-month new registrar of regulatory services to the last year board meeting, which was great. And he gave us a bit of an overview about kind of what's on his agenda. But one of the things that we've talked about and that I included in the last chair newsletter, so I'm sure you've all read that, was that they plan to do some consultations to get some feedback from CHPs around the experience of going through registration for those that might have done that recently, and or the compliance process associated with NRSCH, to find out how well or not that's working. Their perception is that it's quite onerous, and I think most of us would agree. So there was a link in the newsletter, in the Chair July newsletter, which just says if you want to see, you can call the office or there's an email. So when I stop talking, I'll put the email address in the chat. So if people are interested, I really encourage you to participate. The new registrar is really a kind of interested in streamlining and modernising the regulatory services. So I think it's a great opportunity. And in the time that we've had the NRSCH, I don't recall a single time that the registrar's office has actually wanted to consult with CHPs to find out what their experience of the process is. So I'd encourage people. So if you haven't read the newsletter, that's my news item. Do it just for that purpose. But I'll put the address in the chat. The other thing that I wanted to flag. Oh, thanks, Alan. The other thing I wanted to flag was that, and Fiona's probably going to send some more comms out about this, but it was a brief mention in the last Chair newsletter, is that we are planning a fringe event aligned with the Huri conference. I've probably stolen Fiona's thunder. She might talk a bit more about it, but so I won't say any more. I'll just say watch this space, and if you're making travel plans, allow some extra time so you can participate. It's on the Monday before the conference starts. Have I got that day right? It is a Monday, isn't it, Fiona? Yeah. Anyway, I'll let her talk a bit more about that. And then the other thing just to mention to people is that hopefully you're across the rental reforms and the additional discussion paper that's been released. Submissions to that close on Friday, and she is making a response to that. I guess the two critical things are, one is that they made changes from the 1st of July, which can restrict rental increases to once per annum. And this latest discussion paper is talking about linking that once per year to the property rather than the tenants. There's all sorts of implications for that for CHPs, in being able to adjust rents when tenancies change, et cetera, et cetera. So we have got a written response to that that's in draft and out with our board at the moment. But if CHPs want to make their own short submission talking about the implications for them, then I would encourage that as well. I think that's all I can remember today.
I just want to put in a plug. We're really pleased to be partnering Cheer Queensland and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Queensland to run a session on, growth and float the idea of and seek your input to elements of an industry roadmap. It's really hard operating in this environment when we haven't really fully defined the light on the hill, like where we want to land in 10 or 20 years' time, in terms of the size of the sector, the growth of the sector, etc. So we want to take advantage of the fact that some of you will be coming to Brisbane, I hope, and that we can put some time and effort into that. And if you're not heading to Brisbane and you're really interested in that, we can examine some opportunities for hybrid arrangements, but also we'll be following it up. It won't be the last time that we seek to talk to the sector about it. QShelter is going to be offering a concurrent session as well, more around system design across housing and homelessness. We're seeking to have some input to a paper we want to write to government to help shape the future of the agreement between the national government and the states, in addition to the morning being used to gather people around the question of workforce. We have been funded to examine a workforce wellbeing framework as well as workforce attraction and retention strategies and mechanisms. So if you're able to participate in the morning, we'll have a bit of a session, a social lunch, and then afterwards some refreshments as well in the afternoon before a few other things happen in the evening relating to Ahuri and other activities. So it's looking to be a good day with some options for people to gather both formally and informally, and that's the 9th of October. We'd love to see you there if you're able to come. And you don't have to be registered for the conference to come to that day, of course. It's being worked on by us with Anne-Marie and Neil in some instances, and other peaks for those other streams of activity.
Yeah.
We've done all the talking, so please use the remaining time to tell us how things are going.
Hi Fiona, it's Sally here. Sorry, just finding my mute button. Just wanted to find out how we can register for that Monday session. I just had a quick look on the events and I couldn't see it on your shelter page. Is there a special trick?
Sally, really good question. It's all being uploaded as we speak. Jessica's feverishly working upstairs to get it all loaded up, so it'll come out in a special bulletin to everyone.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Murray. I just wondered, how many expressions of interest did you get just out of curiosity for the Community Housing Futures? Was there many? Sorry, can't hear you.
No, you're okay. So for I think it's okay for me to talk approximate numbers, Fiona.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking, is there a risk of, putting me on the
I
spot?
want to take risks.
Sure. So for the professional advisory panel, we had just around 25 come in,
Okay.
which is great. And then for the growth readiness and capability assessment workshops and sessions, we had 20 come in.
Right. Thank you for that. That's
No
good.
worries. Yeah.
Something with a CRS that's come up with us that's never come up before is one of our duplexes was sold, and we didn't know until everything had been finalised that it had actually been sold to a real estate agent. And I can recommend nobody going to a real estate agent. It's been very, very difficult. It's taken a lot of time away from us, and they've agreed to rent it through with us for a year, but after that year's up, we probably won't be going with them anymore. And the only reason I did it at first place was it was a very quick turnaround time to try and find the tenants who are in there somewhere else. So I don't know if anyone's had that experience with renting through a real estate agent, but the whole bond thing, it was very confusing, very complicated. They didn't comply well with what we were asking. So yeah, I don't suggest that happen for anyone. The heads up. I don't know if anyone else does it though.
I think there's a mix, isn't there, Fiona, of some that do go through real estate and some that are directly with the landlord. And I guess it just depends on. I guess it just depends on the real estate agent's awareness and position and how willing they are to work with the organisation.
Yeah.
So did you have a private landlord that you were dealing directly with and then they went to a real estate agent? Is that how it happened?
Yes. Yeah, basically, we didn't know it was being sold to a real estate agent. I probably would have pulled out then had we known.
Yeah.
They did really dodgy things with bonds. They wanted to refund the tenant their bonds, and then we paid for the bond. And I sent through all the policy and every bit of anything I could find about how we operate. They took a lot of time as well.
Okay.
We've had a lot of success with our private owners, so
yeah, going directly to the owner.
Yeah, much easier.
And look, we hear that especially from regional communities where the relationships are strong and they've been built over a long period of time. Just it's something that we find ourselves saying as we advocate for the department to work more to pick up additional head lease properties through the sector and through their relationships. It's not always going to work, but we've had a lot of really good feedback about how the sector is negotiating better prices or doing their best to do that, and just the depth of the relationship and the trust. And you don't want to lose that too quickly. The only other related thing that someone's spoken to me about is that when properties rented out through CRS are up for sale, enabling CHPs perhaps to purchase those properties if they're fit for purpose and they're a good asset, and all the other tests that you have to do in case it represents an opportunity, for asset accumulation and just an opportunity to secure those properties if they're a really good property. And look, I've had a meeting with a tier 3 that put the case as well. If we could buy those properties at that moment, we stabilise the tenancy, the best outcome, for the household. But then also, and this is I suppose not current policy, but whether or not then instead of applying the funding that we get to rent, being able to apply it to a loan so that the equity is building and the money is in a sense held in perpetuity by the sector. So I think that's, there really are some policy settings of interest. This particular tier 3 had seen opportunities come and go like that, and they wondered why it couldn't be converted into loan repayments if the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah,
you heard it here, but I mean, he was really lamenting it because the couple of times it would have stabilised a tenants.
Yeah. Well, we've got great relationships with our lessors, but they're like everyone, they're trying to get as much money as they can out of something that costs them little, basically. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a greed factor that flows into it as well. Well, we're very lucky. We handed back 3 properties this year due to sales, but we were able to re-tenant all those people. And it was just pure luck that we were offered more properties through locally.
I think there's some messages here, and certainly in our engagement with REIQ, what they might do with their members, because REIQ members really benefit from the CRS program, and they really benefit from the way that CHPs do their work. And, I'm not sure what opportunities there might be to do some general comms around when properties are up for sale, having good early communication with CHPs when they're head leasing. For all the benefit, including a secure revenue stream, maybe we can work out a couple of protocols around communication. Challenge with the real estate industry, which I'm telling experts, and I know that you know more about this than me, but it's not just a single industry that's easy to talk to. The structure of the real estate industry with basically franchise businesses, there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of masters, and it's not even the case that one brand will be consistent in their approach between Aspley and Sunshine Coast, for example. It's it's a challenge, but I will really raise those issues when I meet with Antonia from REIQ next.
That'd be great. It'd be good to see some more work done around that.
It could even be an education piece, like a one-pager, that the property managers are a lot better equipped into telling their landlords what the program's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies.
Just two things, I guess, to wrap up.
If you could speak a bit closer, Murray, it's just a bit quiet. Yeah.
Yes, I feel like I've got to yell into my laptop. So just two things. We've had some inquiries come through from people now that the grants have been closed. So feel free to touch base with us so we can talk through what that looks like for your individual organisation in preparation for round 2. And this is our next Feeling the Pulse session. So on Wednesday, the 20th of September, we're back on Zoom. This time will be, I think it's Department of State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning. So a representative from them just to discuss the MIDS process, so Ministerial Infrastructure Designation, which essentially provides an alternative opportunity to lodging your application to state rather than through the local council. So that's our next session.
I think Chia's done some work on this already, so I think it's a bit of a refresher on that pathway. And we had the Salvation Army was one of the first CHPs to go through that process. So it might even be interesting to have them online to hear how they found the experience.
Everybody, thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.
Thanks,
Bye.
Murray. Thanks,
Bye.
Lana. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.